Welcome again to another program of Searching for Answers, a program designed to help you, the viewer, as well as all of us here on the panel, and we have a big panel tonight, as you've noticed, to better understand the Bible, to better understand the book of Acts. We are almost through with the book of Acts, and I would invite you to get your various interpretations of the Bible and go along with us as we try to understand what Paul is trying to say to us at his time of captivity. On my right is
Richard Rice, Loma Linda University.
John Jones, La Sierra University.
Gerald Winslow, Loma Linda University.
John Brunt, the Azure Hills Church.
Ivan Blazin, Loma Linda University.
My name is Carolyn Thompson, and on my left is my good friend, and I would like for you to continue reading in the book of Acts.
Well, maybe we should set the stage a little bit.
Sure.
I suppose one way to put it is Paul's been in deep trouble. This is the story of Paul, and he's been accused by his countrymen of bad things. He brought a Greek into the temple, they say. He doesn't observe our laws, and some have even taken a vow to kill him. And they're not going to eat or drink until they've done him in. But his nephew, as you pointed out in a previous program, tipped off the governor here, the tribune as he's called, and so they have cooked up a plan to get Paul out of trouble. And that's where we pick up the story, I think, isn't it? He's sent a letter off to that is we just read to the governor Felix, telling him what's going on. And we pick up the story in chapter 23, verse 31.
All right, would you continue?
So these soldiers, and there are a lot of them, if just by way of review again, I think we were all sort of surprised that there are 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. So I think if I were marched out of Dodge with that contingency, it'd look like a real parade, wouldn't
That's
it?
right.
No lynching tonight.
No
That's
lynching
right.
tonight. They're going to make sure that he has safe passage out of here, and no question about it. So that's how many soldiers. Verse 31. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him during the night to Antipatris. The next day they let the horsemen go on with him while they returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he belonged to, and when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. Then he ordered that he be kept under guard in Herod's headquarters. Now there are enough he's that are not fully described there, so that I suppose we should understand that this is Felix
Yes.
who's saying this, right?
Right. Tell me a little bit about Felix. What do we know?
I don't know that much about him. I know the name Felix because it's a company in Sweden that produces jam. So I think you're going to have to have one of these biblical scholars. But I learned
Get you out of the jam?
You get me out of the jam. And I learned from these scholars a little bit last time that he is known to history, and that John, I think you described him as a procurator.
Yeah, and was a bloody fellow. Had quite a bit of blood on his hands. Had a brother who was kind of famous, and that's how he got his power. But he finally was so bloody that the Romans couldn't even take him, and they called him back to Rome, and he lost his position.
In other words, not one of your favorite history
No.
people from history.
No, he was a servant, but his brother was on a first-name basis with somebody very important, and he raised him up as a free man, and then he became had this office as head of state. And from what I've read in secular literature, he was ruthless in many ways, even to the people who supported him. He would, at a whim, he'd order them to be murdered. So he wasn't very nice. Had a nice wife and 3 princesses, and the third one stuck. So anyway, it turns out that Felix knew a little bit about the way. That's the other thing I found out. And I thought that was really interesting. And from what I think as we read on, we will find that he was quite nice to Paul in many ways. All right, Rick Rice.
Shall we start chapter 24?
Yes.
We're ready for that. 5 days later, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and an attorney, a certain Tertullus, and they reported their case against Paul to the governor. When Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Your Excellency, because of you we have long enjoyed peace, and reforms have been made for this people because of your foresight. We welcome this in every way and everywhere with utmost gratitude. But to detain you no further, I beg you to hear us briefly with your customary graciousness. We have in fact found this man a pestilent fellow, an agitator among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and so we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn from him concerning everything of which we accuse him." The Jews also joined in the charge by asserting that all this was true. Now, what a speech.
Yeah.
He
All
laid it
right,
on.
Buttering
yeah.
up.
Your Excellency,
Yeah.
we're grateful for your
Oh.
foresight, your wonderful accomplishments. And now, if you'll let me, I'll just dive right in and have it with Paul. Now,
Yeah.
question to our New Testament scholars. Tertullus is a Latin name. Is this man an attorney hired by the Jewish leaders to
Sounds like
represent
it.
them because he knows probably the language and the court customs and everything, or is he a Jew representing his own people? What do you think? Do we know for sure? Or maybe
I don't think we do.
We don't know.
we
for
don't know.
sure.
He seems to have all the, well, I don't want to
I would
characterize my
guess.
attorney friends in a negative way. He seems to know just how to work things in the court.
Well,
don't
it's
you think?
interesting that he's called an attorney, and that's probably the right translation.
right.
But it does come from a Greek word, rhetor, one with rhetorical skills,
Yes.
which he so nicely manifests right now.
I wonder if that's kind of a standard for Paul, who's been listening to this, right? And sort of saying, I think I can do as well as Tertullus has done.
Yeah.
You ain't seen nothing yet. Listen to me now.
One puzzling thing that I just want to ask about is that he says this fellow is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes.
Yeah.
That's not so, is it? Or what do you make of
No.
There is a branch of the Nazarenes who don't regard him as their leader
that? At all, right. So did he just slip up there? Or
Maybe he figured that Felix already had some negative views of who the Nazarenes might have been and just made an accusation hoping it would stick. What do you think?
A general blanket.
Yeah,
kind
just-
of
Well, he doesn't tell the truth about Paul in any case. He calls him a pestilent fellow. He spreads pestilence all around. It's like saying he's like a cancer that metastasizes, you know, here and there and so on.
Yeah, I might, some of the things that were, Paul was accused of was he was a stirrer up of trouble and a pest. Also, Paul was a leader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Paul was a defiler of the temple. The priests were Sadducees, the collaborationist party. To defile the temple was to infringe the rights and laws of the priests. And the Romans, Tertullus hoped, would take the side of the pro-Roman party. The charge was that most dangerous of things, a series of half-truths and twisted facts. Okay, John Jones.
Well, it is true that trouble did accompany Paul wherever he went. And not only trouble for himself, but others too. And so maybe the first part of the accusation has some content to it. Then it gets more far-fetched, of course, as he goes. So we've got in verse 9 here these people who are called the Jews, which may imply that Tertullus is not a Jew, Rick,
That would-
who
yeah, that
are
would be-
who are kind of amening him here and joining in. And so when the governor motions him to speak, Paul replies. Yep. Verse 10. I cheerfully make my defense, knowing that for many years you've been a judge over this nation. He doesn't say a good judge, simply a judge. As you can find out, it's not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. They did not find me disputing with anyone in the temple or stirring up a crowd, either in the synagogues or throughout the city. Now, he's certainly done that elsewhere, minding his manners in Jerusalem. Neither can they prove to you the charge that they now bring against me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God of our ancestors, believing everything laid down according to the law or written in the prophets. I have a hope in God, a hope that they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. Therefore, I do my best always to have a clear conscience toward God and all people. And now after some years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to offer sacrifices, very standard thing for Jews to do, even non-Christians. The Jews of the diaspora regularly brought financial aid to the home folks when they visit Jerusalem at feast time. So this would be quite comprehensible to Felix, or routine thing.
Well, John, wasn't he for years collecting an offering?
Yes, exactly.
He wanted to cement relationships
Exactly.
between Jews and Gentiles, and so he's,
Yeah.
to imagine it took him a series of years. Some of the most beautiful things are said about this in 2 Corinthians, chapters 8 and 9, particularly chapter 8.
Yeah.
Though he was rich, yet for our sakes he became poor, so that through his poverty we might become rich. What powerful motivations he gives there.
All right, you want to continue on?
Well, we'll just round this off down through verse 21 then, if you like. While I was doing all of this, they found me in the temple, completing the rite of purification without any crowd or disturbance. Completing the purification is a very Jewish thing to do. But there were some Jews from Asia. They ought to be here before you to make their accusations, if they have anything against me. Or let these men here tell what crime they had found when I stood before the council. Unless it was this one sentence that I called out while standing before them, it's about the resurrection of the dead that I'm in trial before you today. He may have decided to play that card once again. Now, it is true that Felix would obviously have known something about the followers of the way, not only because he was a procurator, and because this was a movement that was abroad in the land of which he was appointed administrator, but also we know that there were Christians, indeed a fairly strong contingent apparently, right there in Caesarea. A couple chapters earlier we read of Paul stopping in there with his fellow travelers and being taken into the home of one of the leading Christians in the area for a few days. So this is something that is not altogether strange apparently to Felix, and Paul is hooking in on that knowledge.
Okay, Jerry?
Well, all right, we've come down to verse 22.
Right.
But Felix, who was rather well informed about the way, confirming what John just said, adjourned the hearing with the comment, when Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. Then he ordered the centurion to keep him in custody, but to let him have some liberty and not to prevent any of his friends from taking care of his needs. Somebody go on, or is it?
Let's go
shall we
for
stop?
John Brunt.
Okay.
Okay. Verse 24 of chapter 24. Some days later, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him speak concerning faith in Christ Jesus. And as he discussed justice, self-control, and the coming judgment, Felix became frightened and said, "Go away for the present. When I have an opportunity, I will send for you." At the same time, he hoped that money would be given to him by Paul, and for that reason he used to send for him very often and converse with him. After 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and since he wanted to grant the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison.
Also, my Bible said in the last few verses that he kept having Paul come to visit him because he thought that he could get a bribe from him.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, who wants to read chapter 25?
It is interesting to notice, just as we move on to 25 here quickly,
Okay.
notice what Paul talks about.
That's right.
With Felix. Now, we've got sermons of Paul's all over the place, even in his own letters. Where do we see him talking about justice and autarkeia, self-control. These are very Greek and Roman Hellenistic values. Paul is once again being all things to all people here, I think. This is
Yeah.
interesting.
That is interesting because there were the four cardinal virtues, in Greek culture. Justice was one, and self-control or temperance was one. Wisdom and courage were the other two. And he picks up on that.
Yeah, interesting.
And
Well,
I thought it was
I-
interesting that Felix was acquainted with the way. And when he started to talk to him about the judgment, he said, he was afraid. Don't talk about that now.
he had
come
good reason
come
to
back
be,
later.
didn't
Yes.
Well, I thought Paul gives a great speech, especially following that lawyer who, laid on the charm and
Yeah.
everything. And Paul just lays out the facts and then presses them and then gets to his trump card at the end by saying it's all about this dispute over the resurrection of the dead, which Romans were very reluctant to get involved, typically in intramural squabbling over religious issues and laws. We think about the incident in Corinth, where, what was his name?
Sergius Paulus.
Yeah, he says, no, I care nothing for these things, settle it yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
Take care of it. So here
Yeah.
you have that. But it's kind of interesting that he would have Paul come several times and give him the message. I think there may be some people who like to be reminded of their duties, even though they're not performing them very well, maybe with the idea that if I listen long enough, that somehow makes up for my failure to do it. I don't know. It's a strange
Yeah.
kind of psychological thing, but I remember reading about some corrupt king of France who enjoyed listening to great preaching. And you have some court preacher come in and
I would've
discourse
thought-
on the gospel, and
I would have thought
going.
Felix would have shuddered a little bit.
Yeah, I would too.
Because Paul discusses justice and the coming judgment.
That's right.
And I mean, and if he's listening to Paul talk about that over and over and over again, my, oh my, that would
Yeah.
be a fearsome experience.
That's right. That's right.
Now, Carolyn, I wanted to ask these theologians. Paul says there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the
And the
unrighteous.
unrighteous,
This
right.
is his belief?
Right.
Commonly held, or obviously
Well,
a dispute between
going-
Sadducees and Pharisees, but
Yeah.
Well, going back to Daniel, 12 speaks of a resurrection of the righteous and of the unrighteous.
unrighteous.
Right.
I misspoke, Rick. It was Galileo that made that in Corinth. The
Yeah.
governor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I got my answer.
Okay. All right. Shall we carry on? And who did Ivan Blazin, could
Yeah,
you
sure.
carry on, please?
All right, this is chapter 25, verse 1.
Right.
3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews gave him a report against Paul. They appealed to him and requested as a favor to them against Paul to have him transferred to Jerusalem. They were, in fact, planning an ambush to kill him along the way.
Again. They're not
Again,
going to
yeah.
give up, are they?
No, they're after
This
his
is
hide.
2 years later. and
Yeah.
they're still at it.
Must have been a different group if they kept their vow not to drink or eat for 2 years.
no vows this time.
Well, in verse 4, Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So, he said, let those of you who have the authority come down with me, and if there's anything wrong about the man, let them accuse him. This sounds like a very just thing to do.
Festus is a much better leader, and he seems to be a person who really cares about justice.
Yes.
And you notice he gets right on things here. It's
He
only
does.
a couple days, and he's already
That's
there in
right.
Jerusalem, finding out about this. And
Well, but it's interesting that the Jews would request a favor to them.
yeah.
They were trying to cut around the...
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, continue on, Rick.
Are we verse 6 of chapter 25? After he had stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. The next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he arrived, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem surrounded him, bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Paul said in his defense, I have in no way committed an offense against the law of the Jews or against the temple or against the emperor. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, asked Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be tried there before me on these charges? Paul said, I am appealing to the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried. I've done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know. Now, if I am in the wrong and have committed something for which I deserve to die, I am not trying to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can turn me over to them. I appeal to the emperor. Then Festus, after he had conferred with his council, replied, you have appealed to the emperor you will go.
Was that a mistake?
Well, in retrospect, I guess we all have 20/20 hindsight, but I think Paul was getting impatient with the dilatory practices of the governors there and saying, as a Roman citizen, I have rights and I want my case resolved and I'm going to exercise my rights to get going.
I appeal to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's
That's
right.
it.
Though you wonder, I mean, hindsight never gives you what would have happened with other options. And if he had stayed there and been released ultimately, it seems to me there's a pretty good chance he might have been killed.
That's right.
So,
We did this out of
his-
self-preservation.
yeah, appealing to Rome gets him away from the people who are going to ambush him if he's free. And I suspect that if he had been freed, he might not have made it.
You know, for me, one of the it's a kind of a cumulative effect of going through all of these confrontations before various tribunals. There are societies today where somebody who'd created as much trouble as Paul had created in the society would have been done in a long time ago. You have to admire the Romans for one thing. They do seem to want to keep their own rules. And if he appeals to the Supreme Court, he goes. And a thought occurs to me that it's right at this very time that the Romans are also ruling what becomes known as Britain, Great Britain, right? And we are, to a very substantial degree, inheritors in this society of Roman British law.
Is that right?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Scholars refer to our system of law as Anglo-American because we borrowed from the British, but they built very heavily on this same notion of you have some rights, you can appeal to a higher court, and you will have your day in court, which means you can't just go and do people in.
Well,
You have to admire them for some of that.
It is remarkable when you look at the way that different empires in the ancient world governed, that Rome had the most enlightened system. Now, they were cruel in establishing their power, but once they got it in place and got their systems going, many times the people under them appreciated the superiority. It's been said in France, who put up such a big fight when they finally became, what would you call it, Latinized or whatever. They embraced the system and probably more warmly than any other and accepted it for what, several hundred years.
Yes.
So
There was bribery. Obviously, we've had a reference to the practice, but nonetheless, by and large, the intent, I think, was as you've described it, Jerry. A government of laws, not of men. That was their slogan. Didn't always live up to it, but the intent was there.
Just as today, some were better at it than others, as John Brown observed. Festus seemed to be a little better at it, more level-headed.
do we know what happened to Felix when he was relieved of his responsibilities?
He eventually was exiled, I believe.
Yes.
Well,
Good.
good.
Moving right along here.
To the vast and rich estate of his brother Pallas,
Yeah.
peopled with slaves.
Yeah.
You don't know.
All right.
Okay, continue reading, Ivan.
Well, all right, verse 13. After several days had passed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to welcome Festus. Since they were staying there several days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, "There is a man here who was left in prison by Felix. When I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews informed me about him and asked for a sentence against him. I told them that it was not the custom of the Romans to hand over anyone before the accused had met the accusers face to face and had been given an opportunity to make a defense against the charge. And there's this Roman thing you're
Yeah.
talking about, and it's very good to see. So verse 17. So when they met here, I lost no time, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accuser stood up, they did not charge him with any of the crimes that I was expecting. Instead, they had certain points of disagreement with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. Since I was at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wished to go to Jerusalem and be tried there on these charges. When Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of his imperial majesty, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to the emperor. Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you will hear him. Yeah.
All right. Sounds like we're going to leave our audience on a note of
Just the right
questions.
spot.
What's
Yes.
going to happen? And I think that Acts is just it has so many stories in it. You just can't get around everything, but you do the best you can. And I would encourage you to get out your dictionaries and all your different interpretations so that you can realize what Paul is saying and what the Romans are saying to him. It looks to me like the Romans were protecting him, where the Jews were going to twice try to kill him. So it's all very interesting. But in the meantime, until next time, this is Carolyn Thompson for Searching for Answers.